Maybe you can't even explain why, but something inside you is tired of justifying yourself, of pleasing others, of seeking approval in places that only drain you. As Osho said, when the disciple is ready, the message finds its way. And if this message has found you now, it is because there is something in your soul asking for freedom. How many times have you found yourself trying to prove your worth, explain your intentions, defend yourself from misunderstandings that shouldn't even exist? You talk, you wear yourself out, you argue, but deep down, you feel like nothing changes. Because the truth is simple. Those who need to understand you don't require explanations. Those who vibrate on the same frequency hear you even in silence. But the outside world has learned to mistake noise for truth, and that's why silence is so disturbing. Osho said that silence is not absence, it is total presence. And perhaps this is the awakening you've resisted most, no longer needing the approval of others to feel whole. Freedom begins the very moment you stop chasing applause and begin to listen to the sound of your own consciousness. Maybe you're experiencing this right now. That feeling that the more you try to explain yourself, the less you're understood, that the more you offer, the less they value you. You try to keep the peace, but it seems like the world constantly tests your limits. And when you finally decide to keep quiet, when you choose silence, guilt sets in. The old guilt that makes you believe protecting yourself is selfish. But what if it's the other way around? What if silence is the loudest cry of the mature soul? There's a kind of freedom that only arises when you choose not to react, when you stop trying to fix what's outside and start observing what's happening inside. In that instant, the noise of opinions loses its power, the fear of rejection dissolves, and what once imprisoned you begins to lose its meaning. It's the moment you understand that silence isn't a punishment, it's a return. A return to your essence, to your energy, to that which no external gaze can validate. Osho reminded us that those who seek approval live as a reflection, never as a presence. You become a mirror of others' desires, and little by little, you disappear within yourself. The need for acceptance is a gilded prison. It shines on the outside but suffocates on the inside. Silence, on the other hand, is the space where the soul breathes. It is the interval between one thought and the next, where you finally find yourself. How many times have you felt exhausted trying to be understood, trying to prove that you have good intentions, that you didn't mean to hurt, that you're always available? The problem is that the conditioned mind believes it will only be loved if it is useful, if it is good, if it is accepted. But Osho said, true freedom is born when you stop being good to others and start being true to yourself. And maybe that's what you need today, to stop explaining your silence and simply inhabit it. Because conscious silence isn't an escape, it's presence. It doesn't distance you from people, it simply brings you closer to what's real. It cuts through the noise, the expectations, the invisible demands, and returns you to your natural state of being, simple, whole, free. The world will try to provoke you, throw you off balance, make you believe you have something to prove. But those who choose silence as their path have already understood that reacting is the same as surrendering their own power. Every time you respond impulsively, someone else is feeding their control over your energy. And every time you remain silent consciously, you become immune. Because silence is not the absence of a response, it is the presence of wisdom. It may be uncomfortable at first. The ego wants to scream, wants to explain, wants to win the argument. But note, this impulse comes from fear, and fear always keeps you small. When you silence yourself, fear loses ground. It is in this space that freedom is born, true freedom, the kind that doesn't depend on what people say about you. If you're listening to this right now, it's because there's a part of you ready for this transformation, a part tired of losing yourself trying to please the world, a part that just wants to rest within itself. And maybe the first step to that is simply stopping, breathing, silence. Because the moment you choose silence over approval, something profoundly changes. You stop being an echo and become a voice that doesn't need to be loud because it vibrates in truth. If this has already started to resonate within you, stay with me for the next few minutes. What comes next could completely change the way you relate to the world, and most importantly, to yourself. If this video reached you, it's because your energy called for silence. Nothing happens by chance. Osho said that when the disciple is ready, the message finds its way. And perhaps this message is exactly what you needed to hear today. Before continuing, I want you to write in the comments, "I choose conscious silence." This simple gesture is more than a phrase. It's a commitment to your own freedom. Each time you affirm this, you reconnect with your inner peace. If what I've said so far has touched you in any way, leave your like, that's it, subscribe to the channel. This isn't about numbers, it's about energy, about spreading messages that help more people wake up, free themselves from the need for approval, and find the power of silence. Breathe. Stay with me, because what comes next will show you what really happens when silence stops being an escape and becomes freedom. Perhaps you've spent your entire life trying to be understood, and yet no one has truly heard you. It's as if your words echo in the void, bouncing off invisible walls of inattention and noise. You speak from the heart, but the world seems too distracted to listen. And deep down, there's a profound weariness in always needing to explain yourself, justify yourself, fit into expectations that were never yours. Osho said, "When you live to please, you cease to be a presence. You become merely a reflection of other people's expectations, and that's exactly what exhausts you. You've grown accustomed to being the shoulder to cry on, the friend who understands, the partner who gives in, the employee who says okay even when you're broken. It's a silent programming that makes you believe that to be loved, you need to be useful, you need to always be available. But this limitless availability is the root of a pain that almost no one realizes: self-abandonment. You give so much of yourself, try so hard to maintain harmony, that you end up disappearing within your own kindness. And the cruelest thing is that the world gets used to this. People get used to your yes. You've become the emotional emergency button for many people. When they need help, they turn to you. When you need help, silence is the answer. And that hurts. It hurts to realize that somewhere along the way, you became an emotional charging station for others, while your own battery drains. It hurts to realize that the more you strive to be understood, the more people see you only for the role you play, and not for who you are. Osho taught that the conditioned mind seeks approval because it's afraid of disappearing. So you explain yourself, defend yourself, try to be clear, try not to hurt. But the more you try, the further you move away from your own truth. The desire to be accepted is a kind of spiritual prison. It seems like love, but it's fear in disguise. It's the fear of being rejected, of being misunderstood, of being left behind. So you say more than you feel, promise more than you can, smile when you'd rather just stay silent. The problem is that this pattern doesn't end as long as you keep trying to fix others' perceptions of you. Because others don't necessarily want to understand you. They just want to maintain access to your energy. And every time you over-explain yourself, you offer them another key for them to use you again. Therefore, there is an almost divine liberation in choosing silence. It seems empty, but it is full of presence. In silence, you stop being a mirror and return to being essence. There's a special loneliness that comes with this process, and it's frightening. It's the void between the old and the new, the space between the self that pleased and the self that awakens. At first, it feels like you're losing people, losing connections, losing relevance. But in reality, you're just losing what consumed you. Osho said that silence is the first step to individuation. It's in silence that you recognize yourself without needing to explain yourself. It's in silence that you discover what's genuine and what was just a survival habit. You begin to realize how you lived for the sake of maintaining other people's approval. Praise gave you validation, criticism destabilized you. And now, in the midst of silence, all of that begins to lose its power. You begin to observe and not react. That's when the energy shifts. The mind tries to resist because it's been trained to believe that silence is rejection. But silence isn't absence. It's protection. It's the space where you once again feel your own energy pulsing cleanly, without interference. And when you begin to feel this, something within you awakens. A kind of quiet strength that doesn't need to defend itself. A kind of peace that doesn't need to prove anything. This is the freedom Osho spoke of, the freedom that arises when the noise of others stops defining who you are. But reaching this point requires courage. The courage to listen to yourself, to endure the discomfort of emptiness, to allow yourself to be misunderstood and still remain true to yourself. You'll notice that when you stop reacting, the world tries to provoke you. It's as if people can't stand the fact that you're no longer playing along. Before, a single word was enough to unbalance you. Now, you breathe. Before, a single look was enough to blame you. Now, you observe. And that's when the power returns to you, because true control lies with those who don't need to prove anything. Osho said that whoever understands silence understands all that is real. Maybe you're exactly at that point right now, tired of being others' emotional refuge, tired of speaking to those who won't listen, tired of erasing yourself to fit in. And this is where the turning point begins. When you understand that choosing silence isn't a lack of love, it's an excess of awareness. When you understand that saying less is often the most profound gesture of self-respect. If this message resonated with you, I'd love for you to write a sentence in the comments. Write, "I choose to listen to myself." This phrase symbolizes your turning point, because the silence that liberates begins precisely the moment you listen to yourself more than you try to be understood. Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's spiritual intelligence. For a long time, you were led to believe that caring for yourself was synonymous with coldness, that distancing yourself from certain people was a lack of love, that setting boundaries was a sign of pride. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Osho said that true love can only flourish when born of awareness, and that without awareness, all love turns into attachment, need, and dependence. And that's where suffering begins. When you try to love without preserving yourself, you end up confusing surrender with exhaustion, empathy with self-abandonment, and kindness with submission. You grew up hearing that you need to be understanding, that it's beautiful to give of yourself, that those who love need to forgive infinitely. But almost no one taught you that. To truly love, you must first be whole. Loving when you're fragmented is like trying to light the world with an unlit candle. Osho said that silence is the natural state of the awakened soul, and in that silence, you begin to understand something essential. You can't save anyone if you're still drowning. It's at this point that awareness is born. When you realize that the true act of love isn't holding on to what drains you, but releasing what holds you back. That it's not your job to carry everyone's emotional weight, because each person needs to learn to deal with their own shadows. And when you understand this, the guilt begins to dissolve. The guilt of saying no, the guilt of walking away, the guilt of resting, because the selfishness you were taught to fear is just the name people give you when you stop being useful to their chaos. Osho said that silence is not absence, it is total presence, and it is precisely in this inner silence that you learn to discern what is love and what is manipulation. Genuine love does not demand constant sacrifice. It does not demand, does not blame, does not require explanations. Mature love is silent because it trusts. And when you begin to live from this place, something within you reorders itself. You stop reacting automatically, you begin to observe more, to feel more. Words lose their rush, thoughts lose their weight, and your energy finally begins to purify. What once destabilized you now becomes nothing more than a distant reflection. Insults no longer hit you as hard. Judgments no longer echo as they once did, because you understand that nothing external has power when there is presence within. And presence is what silence creates. A noisy mind is like a house full of voices shouting different orders. Silent awareness, on the other hand, is like opening the windows and letting the light in. Everything becomes clear. You realize where you were betraying yourself, where your energy was being wasted, and begin to gather back every piece of yourself you had left in others. It is in this process that you discover the true function of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are portals of self-respect. Every time you say no consciously, you are saying yes to your peace. Every time you choose silence over explanation, you are affirming that you do not need to be understood to exist. This is the spiritual intelligence Osho spoke of, the awakening that comes when you observe yourself instead of reacting, when you understand yourself instead of justifying yourself. There's something profoundly liberating in realizing you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth, that you don't need to fight for space, prove intentions, or beg to be seen, because those who live in the presence of their own being radiate an energy that requires no approval. Silence, when it comes from consciousness, transforms into spiritual authority. It doesn't shout but resonates. It doesn't impose but transforms. And that's why so many are bothered when you choose to remain silent, because your silence reveals their lack of presence. You'll notice that by protecting your energy, some will call you cold, distant, or arrogant. But this doesn't speak about you. It speaks about what your new state awakens in others. People accustomed to your yes will be bothered by your no. People who fed off your chaos will be irritated by your calm. But this is precisely when you must remain steadfast. This is where learning takes hold. Because every time you choose peace, you're sending a message to the universe. I respect myself. And the universe always responds to those who respect themselves. When you begin to honor your energy, different doors open. Situations that once held you back dissolve. People who no longer vibrate at the same frequency naturally move away, and new connections, more aligned with your truth, begin to emerge. This is spiritual intelligence working silently. There is no effort, no struggle, there is only clarity. And with clarity comes power. Osho said that silence is the cradle of inner power. In noise, you react. In silence, you create. In noise, you try to understand the world. In silence, you understand yourself. And when you understand yourself, the world ceases to be a threat. It becomes a mirror, a reflection of your vibration. And when your vibration is peace, nothing but peace can remain. So, the next time you feel the urge to justify yourself, breathe. When you feel the need to prove something, remain silent. When you want to defend your point of view, remember, what is true doesn't need to be explained. Truth sustains itself. And it is in this understanding that energy shifts, chaos dissolves, and freedom begins to emerge. If this message resonated with you, leave a phrase that symbolizes your awakening in the comments. Write, I choose my peace. This is the password that connects you to this new state of consciousness. Because when you declare this, the universe understands. You've finally learned to protect your energy, and that's not selfishness. It's the purest act of self-love. It's not that the other person controls you, they just need you to react the same way you always do. This is one of the most liberating phrases you'll ever hear, because when you understand this deeply, you realize that most of your pain comes not from what others do, but from what you keep repeating. Osho said that the mind loves patterns, and silence is what dissolves them all. The mind is predictable, and that's precisely why it becomes vulnerable. When you always react the same way, people know exactly which buttons to push to throw you off balance. They know that a tone of voice, a provocation, or a calculated silence is enough to make you doubt yourself. But when you choose conscious silence, something changes in the structure. The game breaks, the cycle breaks, the other tries to provoke you but doesn't receive the same reaction. They try to blame you, but you no longer feel guilty. They try to manipulate you with the weight of emotion, but you don't give in. And it's at that moment that power shifts. Because control only exists as long as you react predictably. When you stop being predictable, you become free. Predictability breeds use. This is the first point. The human mind, especially the unconscious mind, gets used to repeating patterns of behavior because it believes they provide security. You behave the same way, respond the same way, and give the same amount of effort because you think you're maintaining balance. But what you're really maintaining is a prison. Predictability allows others to know where to find you, how to manipulate you, and how to bring you back to your usual role. Osho said that repetition feeds the ego, because as long as the pattern repeats itself, the mind continues to believe it's in control. But silence is where the pattern breaks. Because silence is unpredictable. It doesn't offer ready-made answers, it doesn't offer resistance. It simply observes. And when you observe without reacting, you're out of the game. The other person tries to continue, but the game is gone. And what happens is magical. Control dissolves, the drama loses its power, and the energy begins to shift. At first, it's uncomfortable. You feel the urge to defend yourself, to explain yourself, to return to the habit. But if you can remain in conscious silence, something within you matures. You realize you no longer need to prove anything. The second point is guilt. Guilt is the glue that keeps you in the same role. It's guilt that makes you keep responding to messages you don't want to respond to. It's guilt that makes you accept invitations you don't want to accept. It's guilt that makes you sustain empty conversations to avoid disappointing others. And it's also guilt that prevents you from choosing silence, because guilt is the voice of conditioning saying, if you remain silent, you will be misunderstood. If you walk away, you will be forgotten. If you don't respond, you will be considered cold. But Osho said that guilt is an invention of the mind to maintain control over the soul. Guilt is not a virtue, it is a mechanism of emotional manipulation. As long as you believe you need to justify yourself to avoid appearing selfish, the world will continue to drain you. And when you finally understand that true selfishness is abandoning yourself, everything changes. Silence becomes courage. The absence of explanation becomes respect. Distance becomes healing. You begin to see that protecting your energy is an act of love. And the most interesting thing is that the more you remain silent, the more the guilt loses its power. It tries to scream at first, tries to make you doubt, but silence over time makes it disappear. The third point is the most powerful. Conscious silence breaks the cycle. Because reaction is the link that keeps the cycle active. Every time you respond automatically, you feed the pattern. Every time you try to justify, you give energy to the drama. But silence, true silence, the one that comes from awareness and not from escape, is like a broken mirror. It prevents the old image from forming again. Osho said that silence is the end of conditioned thinking, the space where the new can be born. It's curious to realize how silence has the power to diffuse any conflict. When someone provokes you and you react, the fire spreads. But when someone provokes you and you remain silent with presence, the fire goes out. Conscious silence is not passivity, it is controlled power. It is the mastery of one's own energy. And when you learn to remain silent without resentment, the other begins to see themselves reflected. That's when the mirror changes sides. Have you ever noticed that the people who are most bothered by your silence are the ones who needed it most? Because silence is a revealing force. It reveals what's behind the words, what's behind the intention, what's behind the manipulation. When you stop reacting, the other person is forced to confront their own emptiness. And that's exactly what many can't stand. It's at this point that you begin to understand what inner freedom is. Freedom isn't being alone, it's being whole. It's not escaping the world, it's no longer being controlled by it. Silence teaches you this in a way no words could. It brings you face to face with your own energy, and you begin to realize how much you've wasted trying to fix what was never your responsibility. Osho said that silence is the greatest revolution a human being can experience, because it changes everything without needing to fight. And perhaps this is the most beautiful part of this entire journey, realizing that silence doesn't make you weak, it makes you impenetrable. That silence doesn't make you disappear, it makes you appear stronger. That silence doesn't distance you from the right people, it just filters out the wrong ones. The mind will try to resist this new state. It will tell you it's dangerous, that you'll lose connections, that you'll become isolated. But this is just fear trying to keep you in the pattern. Silence doesn't isolate you, it purifies you. And when the mind finally calms, presence sets in. You begin to live in a state of observation, and this is the beginning of true inner freedom. If these words resonate within you, I want you to make a commitment now, a symbolic gesture that marks the beginning of your paradigm shift. Write in the comments, "I choose to break the cycle." This phrase is a reminder that you no longer need to react as you did before, because conscious silence is not the end of communication, it's the beginning of wisdom. For the next 24 hours, practice conscious silence. That's today's proposal. It seems simple, but it's one of the most powerful self-mastery exercises you can try. The challenge is to observe yourself carefully, especially in those moments when you feel the urge to justify yourself, react, or defend yourself. When this happens, take a deep breath and say to yourself, quietly or simply mentally, "I don't need to explain anything today." This phrase is a spiritual key. It breaks the mind's automatic cycle and creates space for awareness to awaken. You'll realize that the urge to explain yourself is almost involuntary. It comes from a place of fear, the fear of being misunderstood, of losing affection, of disappointing someone. It's the fear of rejection disguised as kindness. But when you breathe and decide not to respond, when you allow the silence to speak for you, something powerful happens. You begin to feel a different kind of strength. It's not the strength of reaction, it's the strength of presence. Osho said that those who master their silence master their own destiny, because only those who are able to contain their reaction have true control over their own energy. During this 24-hour period, observe every situation that would normally rob you of your peace. Perhaps someone provokes you. Perhaps a criticism disguised as advice emerges. Perhaps someone pressures you to give an immediate response. It's in these moments that the real exercise begins. The challenge isn't just to remain silent on the outside, but to remain silent on the inside. There's no point in keeping quiet if your mind continues to argue. Conscious silence is the state in which you observe the impulse but choose not to feed the drama. You see the thought arise, feel the emotion build, but instead of acting, you simply observe. The first result of this is discomfort. Silence will bother both you and others. People who are accustomed to your explanations will miss them. They'll try to extract words. They'll want to know what you're thinking. They'll question your distance. And that's when you need to remember your purpose. You're not running away. You're empowering yourself. Conscious silence isn't an absence of communication. It's a higher form of dialogue, the dialogue of energy. Osho said that true communication happens through vibration, not words. And when you practice silence, you begin to communicate differently. Your body changes, your presence changes, even your breathing changes. You realize you no longer need to waste energy trying to be understood, because those who vibrate at the same frequency simply understand without needing an explanation. During these 24 hours, also observe what happens within you. Silence is like a mirror. It reveals everything the noise hid. Perhaps old emotions will surface. Perhaps you'll realize how much you lived in constant defense. Perhaps you'll discover that the greatest noise wasn't coming from outside, but from within. This is the turning point. This is where you begin to reconnect with something you've forgotten, your natural peace. The mind will try to sabotage the process. It will tell you that you need to take a stand, that you'll appear indifferent, that they'll judge you. And that's precisely where the opportunity for growth lies, because conscious silence isn't about looking good, it's about being true. It's about giving your energy the rest it deserves. It's an act of self-love disguised as calm. When you don't react, don't explain, and don't try to control what people think of you, the mind begins to reorganize itself. It realizes there's no danger in just being. In the first moments, you'll feel empty. It's as if something is missing, but that something is just the habit of defending yourself. Each time you resist the urge to justify yourself, you'll realize how deeply ingrained your need for approval was. It's an emotional detox. And the most beautiful thing is that at the end of this process, what's left is authenticity. You stop living to please and start living to be at peace. Osho said that inner peace is not a state you achieve. It's something that's always been there, waiting for the noise to stop. And this noise is made up of thoughts, explanations, desperate attempts to be understood. When the noise disappears, what remains is clarity. And with clarity, you begin to realize the value of your silence. It's not empty, it's full of meaning. During this day, notice how the world reacts to your silence. Notice the people who feel threatened by it, and also those who respect your space. Silence will show you who truly understands you and who was simply feeding off your energy. It will reveal who enjoys your company and who only relishes your availability. And most importantly, it will show you how much energy you were wasting on battles that didn't need to be fought. Each time you successfully practice conscious silence, acknowledge it. Celebrate it internally without needing to tell anyone. This victory is yours. It's the beginning of a new way of being in the world. More centered, lighter, more truthful. And when the day ends, sit in silence again and observe what has changed. Perhaps things around you will still be the same, but you will no longer be the same. Osho said that the true miracle is not changing the world, but changing the way you observe it. The 24-hour challenge is just the beginning. It opens a gap in the mind so something new can be born. When you realize the difference between reacting and responding, between explaining and simply existing, silence will cease to be an effort and become a natural state. And when silence becomes natural, you understand what true spiritual freedom is. If this experience resonates with you, I'd love for you to leave a comment. Write, "I choose silence. I choose my peace." This phrase is more than a mantra. It's a conscious choice. It's your way of telling the universe that from now on, you no longer live to be understood. You live to be at peace. Silence is not an escape. It's the space where you reconnect with what's real. This phrase needs to be felt, not just understood, because often when you choose silence, the world interprets it as distance, indifference, or coldness. But the truth is that silence doesn't distance you from people. It only brings you closer to the truth. It takes you away from the confusion of external voices and brings you back to your own presence. Osho said that compassion without awareness becomes attachment, and awareness without compassion becomes hardness. Balance is the path, and this balance only arises when you understand that silence is the bridge between the two. For a long time we were taught that love was about talking, doing, insisting, resolving. That true love needed to be proven in actions and words, but the highest love is the one that requires no effort. It's the one that exists even when there's silence. Love born of awareness is tranquil, serene, and free of demands. It doesn't need to be explained or forcibly maintained. Osho called this state love without an object, love that simply is, without needing a reason to exist. When you become silent, you begin to hear what truly matters. A noisy mind convinces you that silence is empty, but true silence is full. It's a fertile space where the soul breathes. It's in this space that you begin to see clearly what was previously blurred. It's in this space that you realize who truly loves you and who has merely grown accustomed to using you as a source of attention. And it's also in this space that you realize when you were in relationships out of neediness and calling the fear of being alone love. Conscious silence reveals hidden intentions. It exposes the dynamics that noise masked. It is the mirror where everything is reflected. Attachment, control, manipulation, but also genuine affection, true presence, mutual respect. Osho said that the human mind fears silence because in silence there are no masks. And when the masks fall, many bonds lose their meaning. This is why silence is so transformative, because it doesn't destroy, it reveals. But it's important to understand, silence is not punishment. Silence is not revenge. Spiritual silence, conscious silence, is the opposite. It's not born of anger, it's born of compassion. It's the space you create to avoid reacting with the same unconsciousness that hurt you. It's the pause in which you choose to observe before giving back what you've received. It's the pause that stops the cycle of pain from continuing. When you silence with presence, you interrupt the chain of suffering. And that's how healing begins. Osho said it's easy to be compassionate with others. It's difficult to be compassionate with yourself. And perhaps this is the most profound lesson silence brings, realizing that you also need your own forgiveness. That sometimes the noise that tires you most doesn't come from others, but from incessant self-criticism, from invisible demands, from the guilt you carry for feeling too much, for wanting too much, for giving too much of yourself. Silence is the medicine that dissolves this guilt. It's the embrace you give yourself when you stop judging yourself for having a sensitive heart in an insensitive world. Compassion without awareness is attachment. It's wanting to save the other, even if it costs you your own energy. It's confusing love with need and empathy with exhaustion. Awareness without compassion, on the other hand, becomes hardness. It's the opposite extreme, where you build walls and call them limits. Neither is balance. The path is in the center. And silence is the center. It's there in that neutral point that you learn to be present without losing yourself. You learn to love without clinging. You learn to feel without suffering. Silence is also a form of love. The love that doesn't invade, doesn't demand, doesn't need to prove anything. Silence is absolute respect for one's own energy and the other person's journey. When you understand this, the need to control disappears. You allow people to be who they are, without trying to change them, and this is liberating. Osho said that true love is not a relationship, it is a state of being, and silence is the home of this state. In moments of conflict, silence becomes even more powerful, because it puts you in a state of pure observation. While the other person yells, you observe. While the other person tries to hurt you, you understand. And this understanding doesn't come from reason, it comes from consciousness. It's the silent wisdom that understands that what the other person projects is theirs, not yours. Silence teaches you to return what doesn't belong to you, without resentment, without explanation, simply with presence. And it's at this point that the world begins to change around you, because silence is contagious. When you stop reacting, the other person is forced to listen. When you no longer engage in the game of provocation, the game loses its meaning. The energy of the environment changes. Osho said that silence is the language of the wise, and that those who learn to listen to it begin to understand the universe. And it's true. There is a kind of wisdom that only arises when the mind ceases, when the heart quiets, when the soul retreats. You'll notice that the more you practice conscious silence, the more your presence expands. people begin to sense something different about you. It's as if an invisible calm surrounds you. They come closer, but they no longer drain you. They speak, and you listen without absorbing their weight, because silence creates a natural protective field. It doesn't need to be forced. It simply emanates, and it's this vibration that keeps you grounded, even in the midst of chaos. Osho said that life is made of polarities, and that the secret lies in inhabiting them without identifying with any. Silence teaches you this. It places you between sound and emptiness, between action and pause, between love and detachment. It shows you that it is possible to be firm without being harsh, to be calm without being indifferent, to be compassionate without being submissive. This is true spiritual balance. If you feel like this message speaks to your soul, I invite you to leave a phrase in the comments that symbolizes this state. Write, "I choose balance." This is the reminder that silence is not absence, it is total presence, and it is in silence that compassion and awareness finally meet. When you choose silence over approval, you don't disappear, you finally appear, free, present, whole. It is at this point that the soul reveals itself. You are no longer trying to please, no longer chasing recognition. You simply are. And this being, simple and true, is the deepest state of freedom there is. Osho said that silence is the birth of the new being, the moment when the old identity, made of fears and expectations, finally dissolves. And that's why if you've come this far, it's because something within you has already awakened. You've already taken the first step toward your inner liberation. Now, breathe for a moment and feel this energy within you. It is real. It is the space that opens when the noise ceases, when the mind stops fighting, when the heart decides to simply exist. This is the silent rebirth. It is the point at which pain transforms into clarity, where emptiness ceases to frighten and becomes welcoming. You begin to realize that silence is not loneliness, it is communion with the essential. And if you've made it to the end of this video, I want to tell you something. Few people are willing to go all the way through content like this. It shows that you're truly ready for transformation, ready to live the freedom of being who you are, without needing approval. So, I want to extend an invitation to you. If this content touched your conscience, if it awakened something within you, if it made you see yourself more clearly, subscribe to the channel now. Here, each video is a continuation of this spiritual journey, a further step towards self-knowledge, awakening, and inner peace. Leave yours too like as a sign that you're committed to your conscious silence. This helps this message reach more people who, like you, are ready to break the cycle of approval and choose their own freedom. Every like, every interaction is a way to expand this energy. So allow yourself to continue. Click on the next video, keep an open mind, and let the silence guide you. Because when you learn to listen to yourself, the universe begins to speak to you in a language only the soul understands.